Nathan Hale came into the world on a cold November day in 1922 in the quiet town of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. His earliest years were marked by loss. When he was only 2 years old, the shadow of the influenza epidemic, still lingering years after its deadly waves in 1918 and 1924, claimed both his parents. Orphaned before he could even form lasting memories of them, Nathan was taken in by his Aunt Rachel, who became his guardian and anchor in the world that had already taken so much from him. But fate was not finished testing him. When Rachel herself passed away, Nathan was once again left adrift. This time salvation came from Frank and Mary Farley, old friends of his late father. The Farleys welcomed the boy into their ranch in Darper, treating him not as a burden, but as though he was their own flesh and blood. Their daughter Susan quickly grew close to him, calling him the brother she always wished for. Though Nathan carried the weight of grief in his past, he was not without family. On his mother's side lived a cousin, Becky Friedel, whose presence tethered him still to the memory of a family he lost. Surrounded by the Farley's love and the rugged life of the ranch, Nathan began to find steadiness again. His childhood shaped by both hardship and the unexpected kindness of those who chose to call him their own. Life on the Farley ranch was just as much about discipline as it was about family. Frank Farley, a man who valued self-reliance, believed every child should learn the responsibility of handling a rifle. Both Nathan and Susan spent long afternoons out on the prairie, the sun dipping low behind the hills as they learned to steady their breath and keep their hands true. Susan often joked that Nathan had been born with a rifle in his hands. So natural was his aim. By 1942, that talent had grown into something undeniable. When Nathan entered the Young Ranchers of South Dakota's annual shooting contest, few expected the quiet ranch boy to make much of an impression. But when the smoke cleared and the scores were tallied, it was Nathan Hale who stood on top. His accuracy had a staggering 96.5%. It was a record that no one else could touch, and it remained unbroken for years afterward. Word of his skills spread quickly, and before long he was being spoken of in town, not just as a ranch hand, but as a local legend. 3 years later, as the world was engulfed in turmoil of war, Nathan made a choice that would forever alter the course of his life. In 1945, he enlisted in the United States Army, carrying with him not only the lessons of the ranch, but the reputation of a marksman whose aim never faltered. On April 15, 1945, the prairie boy from South Dakota now found himself among rows of recruits, their boots pounding in unison under the blistering Texan sun. Discipline came hard, but Hale adapted quickly. By June 27th, he had been transferred to Company C of the 1st Armored Division, 37th Armored Regiment. In 1946, after earning his promotion to Private First Class, he gained notoriety for something unusual, pushing his tank past the speed limit in reckless races across the training grounds. The reprimands came, but so did the recognition that Hale had both daring and an instinctual feel for machinery and maneuvering. 2 years later, his steady performance and natural leadership earned him the rank of sergeant. On October 13, 1948, he was working deep in South Dakotan mineshaft when disaster struck. The tunnel around him gave way in a violent collapse, burying men alive in choking dust and rock. Hale clawed through the darkness, carving a path to the adjacent shaft and leading 3 co-workers to safety. For those who walked out of that mine still breathing, he was not just a soldier, but a savior. In February 1949, Hale was transferred overseas to a military camp in Scotland, where he faced one of the most grueling tests the Army had devised, the inaugural Ranger Orientation Program. The program tuned men up, grinding them down to see who would endure. Hale not only endured, he excelled, his scores towering above the others. His instincts so sharp they seemed almost second nature. But May had passed with distinction, his reputation growing once again. 2 months later, his journey brought him back to American soil at Fort Benning, Georgia, where he joined the newly formed 1st Ranger Regiment. For all his skill and rising reputation, Hale's path as a soldier was nearly cut short during a live fire exercise. What began as a routine drill twisted into catastrophe when Hale, ever the bold tactician, attempted an unconventional maneuver against a mock target. In the chaos that followed, Faulty munitions ignited disaster. Much of his squad was killed. Several observers were caught in the blast, and Hale himself was left torn and broken on the field. The Army called it an accident. Official reports laid the blame on the defective shells, but among the survivors, the memories of that day carry more weight than paperwork could contain. Hale was evacuated to the Army's Higgins Trauma Center in Montana, where surgeons fought to piece him back together. Months passed in the haze of operations, grueling rehabilitation, and the slow crawl of recovery. Against all odds, Hale returned to active duty, yet he did not come back unchanged. His superiors recognized his sharpened instinct and relentless drive, assigning him to missions where others might hesitate. Battle after battle, after-action reports painted the same picture. Hale was fearless in combat, quick to improvise, and a leader men would follow the hell itself. But not everyone saw only valor. Doctors who examined him noticed something darker simmering beneath his discipline. A streak of recklessness, the shadow of a man who seemed less concerned with survival than with tissing the edge of death itself. To them, Hale's bravery and brilliance carried a haunting undercurrent, a growing death wish that no metal could disguise. By November 1950, the world had already shifted towards a darker horizon. Rumors of a spreading plague, the so-called European influenza, begun to seep across the Atlantic. And with them came fear, before America would openly step into what would become the Chimera War. Nathan Hale made a choice that once again set him apart. He volunteered for Project Abraham, a clandestine government program whose true purpose was buried under layers of secrecy. When asked why he would risk his life for such an uncertain cause, Hale's answer was plain. In his induction interview, he told them, "Someone like me should volunteer. I don't have parents. I don't have a family. If it costs me everything, then it only costs me." And Hale pressed forward into Project Abraham, unaware of just how much his faith and the faith of humanity was about to change. Inside the walls of Project Abraham, fear was a constant companion. The so-called selection process was little more than a lottery of survival. And each day the test subjects lived with the knowledge that tomorrow one of them might not return. It was in that suffocating atmosphere that Hale's presence became something more than just another volunteer. He refused to let despair take root, organizing impromptu basketball games and arm wrestling contests. He gave the men an outlet, a way to laugh, to compete, to forget if not for only a few hours. Among those watching him closely was Cassandra Acklin, the project clinical psychologist. She found herself pulled towards him in ways that blurred the lines between professional duty and raw human need. At first, Hale wanted nothing to do with her. He resented her role in choosing who lived and who was condemned to the fatal experiments. But shared fear and the weight of isolation eroded those barriers. For a brief, uncertain time, something resembling a relationship flickered between them. The Army did not look kindly on such entanglements. Hale was cited twice for fraternizing with Acklin, his reputation both tarnished and complicated by the very humanity that kept him and others alive in the program. December 1st marked the day Nathan Hale's fate was sealed. By then, 4 test subjects had already gone before him, each one lost to the brutal process. Only Josie Capelli still lingered, trapped in a bed beside Hale's, a survival cruel half measure that left the room heavy with unspoken dread. When Hale's turn came, the doctors had not reached for the same serum that had killed the others. Under the orders of Dr. Fyodor Mikolov, they injected him with something far more dangerous, pure Chimera DNA. The moment it entered his veins, the world unraveled. Hale was wrecked with violent delusions, his mind assaulted by visions he could not comprehend. Panic attacks gripped him, and he fought sleep with desperation born of terror, knowing that surrendering to unconsciousness might mean never waking again. Eventually, exhaustion conquered him. Hale slipped into a brief coma, hovering in the space between life and death. When he awoke, he was changed. Still human, carrying something alien deep within. The program had broken others, but it had not broken him. It was then he struck a bargain. To spare Lieutenant Kenneth Danby or undergoing the same horrific injection. Hale agreed to what the army demanded of him: deployment to England under Operation Deliverance. He would take the fight to the Chimera themselves. Cassandra begged him not to go, torn between duty and fear of losing him. But Hale's path was already written. If he had to carry the burden of the Chimera in his blood, then he would wield it as a weapon against them. In the aftermath of Project Abraham, only a handful of test subjects remained alive, and Nathan Hale was among them. What coursed through his body was no cure, but something far stranger: a partial immunity to the Chimeran virus. On December 25th, while the rest of the country celebrated Christmas in uneasy peace, Hale was quietly released back into the army service. To the world, it looked like a return of a soldier. In truth, it was the beginning of a live trial. The army had remade him, and now they would unleash him to see whether their experiment could endure the crucible of war. On July 11th, 1951, Nathan Hale was deployed with the 1st Ranger Regiment to the battered English city of York as part of Operation Deliverance. His unit, Arrow 2, never even touched the ground intact. The transports were torn apart by a wall of anti-air fire. The sky lit in burning streaks as men and machines rained down. Hale crawled from the wreckage, alive and battered, and he gathered what few survivors he could. It was then the Chimera struck. Crawlers, skittering and ravenous, swarmed the Rangers. One by one, his comrades fell, their bodies twisted into hosts for the Chimeran virus. Hale too was infected, his blood invaded by the alien plague. Where others withered and died, he endured. The shadow of Project Abraham revealed itself. His half-formed immunity kept him alive, though at a cost. When he finally awoke, his body was scarred by the infection, and his eyes burned with an unnatural gold. A lone U.S. medic pulled him back from the brink, and Hale pushed forward, fighting his way through the ruined streets until he reached an abandoned bus depot. There, Captain Winters was desperately holding ground, trying to clear a landing zone for incoming reinforcements. Hale climbed into the seat of the captured saber-toothed tank, its steel hull roaring with borrowed fury. Together, they broke the Chimeran lines, securing the rally point. But victory was fleeting. A Spire attack thundered down upon them, scattering what remained of the regiment. Hale fought until he was dragged under, captured by the Chimera, and taken deep into the nightmare heart of Grimsby, the conversion center. Inside, he witnessed the horror he had only heard about whispered. The grotesque transformation of human beings into Chimeran soldiers. He might have shared their faith, but Hale broke free, cutting his way through the facility until he reached the holding cell. There he found Captain Rachel Parker, moments away from being subjected to the same fate. He saved her, and together they fled the dark machinery of the conversion chambers, carrying with them knowledge that chilled the soul. The Chimera did not simply kill, they remade. Hale fought on, now side by side with the British Army. Yet even as he became their ally, suspicion gnawed at Captain Parker. She had seen his eyes. She knew what the infection meant. Quietly, she sought a way to have him tested, confirm what she had already feared. Hale was already gone, throwing himself into the next battle in Manchester, before she could speak the words aloud. Hale's next orders carried him north, to the besieged city of Manchester. There he joined Captain Mitchell in the British forces, in securing what was described only as a secret weapon, part of the Anglo-American military exchange. The mission was brutal, the Chimera pressing hard at every turn, but Hale pushed through with the same unyielding resolve that had already begun to make his name known among the ranks. When at last the weapon was secured, Hale's curiosity overcame caution. He approached the reinforced container, as if the object within it recognized him. His mind suddenly flooded with a violent alien presence. For a terrifying moment, he was locked in a psychic tether, visions clawing at his sanity, whispers pressing into his skull. Then as quickly as it came, the connection snapped, leaving him shaken, but standing. Whatever the weapon was, it had reached for him. Hale said nothing, regaining his composure before the others could see the crack in his armor. The weapon was successfully delivered to Northern Command in Cheshire, but Hale had no time to rest. Soon after, he was dispatched to Operation Shear, a mission to seal a newly uncovered Chimeran tunnel nexus beneath Nottingham. It was there he met Lieutenant Stephen Cartwright, a sharp-tongued, skeptical officer who at first glance dismissed Hale as just another American with more reputation than substance. That skepticism died the day Cartwright wagered that Hale wouldn't survive a duel with towering Titan. When Hale stood victorious, Cartwright paid his debt with respect he would never have admitted out loud. Perhaps Cartwright had already guessed what others suspected, that Hale carried something alien within him. If so, he kept his silence. Instead, in a rare moment of camaraderie, he pressed a Fairbairn Skies fighting knife into Hale's hand. "You'll need this more than I will," he said. Hale kept the blade, and in time became a trusted companion, as much a part of him as the rifle slung across his back. Hale's path next carried him to Northern Command, traveling with Captain Rachel Parker for a long-awaited debriefing. But when they arrived, the promise of security dissolved into horror. The base had already been overrun. Fires smoldered in the wreckage, and the echoes of battle still lingered in the shattered halls. A sudden cave-in cut Hale off from Parker and the others, leaving him to navigate the ruin alone. Step by step, he fought through the swarms of Chimera, the halls slick with blood and smoke. Hale was there, buried deep in the base's surviving records, the Hale stumbled upon the documents he was never meant to see. Classified data detailing the Chimera War, the nature of the virus, and the truth of the so-called secret weapon. It wasn't just a weapon at all. It was an angel. A towering, nightmare strain of Chimera. It had been the angel's psychic call that drew the Chimera to the Northern Command. Now, sensing Hale's own infection, it reached for his mind. The creature's presence slammed into him, evasive and overwhelming, clawing at his will. For a moment, he teetered on the brink, his thoughts not his own. The alien voice whispering commands inside his skull. But Hale was not so easily broken. With every ounce of strength, he resisted the mind meld, wrenching his consciousness back from the angel's grasp. In a final act of defiance, he leveled his carbine and poured fire into the creature until it collapsed. His psychic hold shattered with his death. When he last reunited with Parker, she saw what he tried to hide. His body moved with a predator's speed, wounds closed with unnatural swiftness. These were not the traits of a normal man, but of something touched by the Chimera. They could see the suspicion in her eyes. Though she said nothing, for now, the war demanded his strength. But the question of what he was becoming could not be ignored forever. The war dragged Hale ever deeper into Britain's ravaged countryside. Following intelligence that the Chimera responsible for the Northern Command assault had come from the west, Hale joined a squad of Royal Commandos led by Lieutenant Stephen Cartwright. Their hunt carried them into the shadowed cliffs of Cheddar Gorge, a place where mist clung to the stone like a shroud. When the mission was finally over, only one man remained alive, Cartwright himself. The lieutenant was bloodied but unbroken, though his eyes carried a new weight. He had seen Hale fight. He had seen the unnatural speed, the unflinching endurance, and now there was no hiding it. Cartwright knew the truth of Hale's infection. Yet rather than turn away, he stood with him, bound by the simple fact that survival left no room for fear. Together they pushed deeper into the gorge, and there they uncovered a secret that shook the foundation of everything humanity thought it had known about the Chimera. The towers that scar Britain's skyline were not constructions. They were excavations, structures buried beneath the earth long before the first attack, now unearthed by the Chimera as if reclaiming something ancient. Hale traced the lines of power conduits leading from the towers, watching as they disappeared into the depths of the ground, feeding some unseen purpose. The two-man carried this revelation to Southern Command in Bristol, desperate to relay the discovery. By the time they arrived, the base was already under siege. Chimera forces descended with overwhelming fury, tearing into soldiers and civilians alike. Hale fought with brutal determination, carving open corridors for evacuation. But the price was steep. Southern Command fell in flames, and with it, countless British lives. What remained was Hale, Cartwright, and a truth darker than the ruins around them. While his allies regrouped towards Cardiff, Hale's instincts pulled him in another direction. Cartwright had once slipped him an old map of routes few others knew. With it in hand, Hale traced the underground power conduits he had seen branching from the towers. Against Parker's objections, he followed them alone in the depths. The tunnels carried him beneath the ruined countryside, past signs of Chimeran excavation, until they opened into a massive tower rising in Bracknell. From there, the conduit shaked onward toward the heart of England, toward London. Standing in the shadow of that great city, Hale felt the alien presence within them stir, linking him once more to the Chimera. Through that connection came a chilling clarity. The towers were not shattered fortresses, but a network. And at its center loomed the hub tower in London. If the hub fell, the entire Chimeran presence across Britain might collapse with it. Determined, Hale carved out a landing zone in the city's outskirts, holding it long enough for the joint British and American task force to flood in. Together, they mounted an all-out assault on the hub tower. But the Chimera did not yield easily. From the south, Goliaths, towering war machines, marched towards the city, their advance threatening to crush this assault before it began. Hale raced to the river crossing, setting charges that brought down both Tower Bridge and South Wark Bridge, halting the machine's path at a terrible cost. Amid the chaos, he reunited with Cartwright. The two men commandeered the Stalker, and turning its devastating weaponry against the final Goliath until it fell in a firestorm of twisted steel. Their victory was short-lived. A monstrous Widowmaker struck, wounding Cartwright badly and leaving him unable to continue. With no time to spare, Hale pressed forward alone, slipping into the nightmare heart of the hub tower. If Britain was to be saved, it would be by his hand and his hand alone. Hale climbed the monstrous hub tower step by step, carving his way through swarms of Chimera as the city burned below. Each floor brought heavier resistance, every hallway echoing with alien roars, but nothing stopped him. His affection made him faster, sharper, and in that moment, more dangerous than the creatures themselves. At last he reached the tower's heart, a massive nuclear fission reactor, pulsing with alien energy. The conduits he had traced across England all fed into this single core, a vast network powered by the angels themselves. With grim determination, Hale set his sights on the reactor and unleashed everything he had. The detonation tore through the tower in a blinding storm of fire and alien steel. The destruction didn't stop there. The chain reaction raced down the conduits, tearing through the Chimeran network. One by one, towers across Britain imploded, and every angel within was annihilated. The pride of their psychic commanders, the Chimera crumbled. Entire armies collapsed within minutes, their coronation and life force unraveling in the wake of their masters' deaths. To the world, Nathan Hale did not live to see that day. Allied officials, watching the hub tower collapse, assumed no man could survive. On July 14, 1951, he was listed as killed in action, his name written into the war history as a fallen hero. But Hale was not dead. He staggered from the wreckage, half-conscious, wandering into the snowbound outskirts of London. It was there, in the frozen silence, that a Black Ops squad finally revealed themselves. They had been shadowing him all along, waiting for this moment. Hale was taken into custody, hidden away from the world he had just saved. Behind closed doors, the Special Research Projects Administration whispered of what he truly was. Operation Deliverance had not merely created a survivor, it had created a risk. For them, the question was no longer whether Hale was a hero. It was whether he could remain human at all. When the Black Ops squad finally secured him, Hale did not go quietly. Even half dead and staggered from the wreckage of London, he fought until the sedatives took hold. When he awoke, he was face to face with Major Richard Blake, a stern figure who wasted no time. Hale was told he would be transported north, SRPA in Iceland. There, the Special Research Projects Administration intended to remake him once more. this time as part of the Sentinel program, a unit designed to harness those like him who had survived Project Abraham's experiments. But when their transport reached Igloo Base, the war was already at their doorstep. Chimera forces had launched a full frontal assault, tearing into the station's defenses with a single-minded fury. Hale and Blake were thrown into chaos, fighting side by side through collapsing corridors and burning laboratories. Their mission was clear: prevent the Chimera from reaching SRPA's most dangerous secret. Hidden deep within the base was a prisoner unlike any other. Daedalus, an angel-like Chimera with the mind of a man who had once been known to Hale. Jordan Shepard, another candidate of Project Abraham, had not survived the way Hale had. Instead, he had transformed into something monstrous, something far beyond human. The defenses failed. Daedalus broke free, his form radiating both power and menace. Hale confronted him in the depths of the base, weapon raised. But the creature did not attack. He looked at him and spoke words that chilled him to the bone. "They are calling us. Can you hear them?" "It is beautiful." Then, with an effortless display of power, Daedalus vanished into the storm, leaving Hale with nothing but an echo of his voice, and the gnawing realization that whatever tether bound them was only beginning to pull tighter. The fall of Igloo Base was not the end. Through fire and ruin, Hale fought his way alongside Major Blake, a handful of surviving SRPA soldiers, and the Russian scientist who had first overseen his transformation, Dr. Fyodor Mikolov. On July 17th, 1951, he was formally inducted into the Sentinel program. For the first time, he was no longer an outlier, no longer a secret experiment carried alone. The Sentinels were a brotherhood of survivors like him, men and women infected with the Chimeran virus, but strong enough to bend it to their will. Each carried superhuman strength, speed, and endurance, though their humanity was fragile, balanced on the edge of a needle. To keep the infection in check, every Sentinel endured regular injections of inhibitors, a ritual reminder that their power was as much a curse as a gift. By August 1st, Hale had been assigned to Echo Team, under the command of Lieutenant Hank Leavitt. It was here he found something resembling a new family, bound not by blood, but by the shared knowledge of what they had become. Together they carried out operations too dangerous for conventional soldiers, striking where no ordinary unit could survive. Though Hale's reputation had already set him apart, more than once he was called to break away from Echo, leading solo missions alongside other Sentinel teams, where the risks were highest and the odds the shortest. Each victory sharpened the legend of Nathan Hale, but each fight also carried him further into the shadow of what the virus inside him might one day make him. By late August 1951, Hale's duties as Sentinel expanded beyond battlefield skirmishes. Word reached SRPA of a critical scientist taken by the Chimera. Dr. Sliberman, the mind behind a newly developed inhibitor, promised to extend the fragile window of immunity that the Sentinels relied on. Without him, their lifeline to humanity would soon dwindle. Hale was given the task of finding him, an operation too delicate and too important to fail. When General Harold Patterson hesitated to risk conventional troops on such a dangerous mission, Hale pressed his case. He needed men he could trust, not just Sentinels who already bore the burden of infection. Patterson relented, granting him 2 army soldiers. The first was Lee Dashiell, a demolitionist Hale had worked with on a handful of occasions. He was pragmatic, but unflinching with explosives, traits Hale knew could turn the tide in the ruined cityscapes of California. The second was Jimmy Sanchez, a sharp-eyed sniper whose skill behind the scope gave their small team the precision they would need to survive against overwhelming odds. With these 2 at his side, Hale set out for San Luis, California, where Silberman was believed to be held. It would be a mission marked by fire and shadows, one more step into a widening war that was beginning to consume the United States. The ruins of Salinas, California, were a graveyard of twisted steel and silence when Hale, Dashiell, and Sanchez slipped inside. The Chimera held the city in their grip, their patrols scouring the streets while the black towers loomed overhead. It was within one of these towers, Convergence Center, that they found the doctor. The sight was grim. The scientist was already infected, his body trembling with the sickness he had once sought to cure. Knowing his time was short, Silberman pressed the vial into Hale's hand, a sample of the inhibitor he had perfected. It was the last work of his life, a desperate hope to prolong the Sentinels' fight against the infection that chained them. Before they could escape, the walls came alive with movement. Spinners, vicious spider-like Chimera, poured into the facility. In the chaos, Dasha was torn apart, left mortally wounded on the blood-sick floor. Sanchez fought to cover Hale's retreat, but the virus found him too, his infection spreading with merciless speed. Cornered in the ruins, Sanchez made his final request. He would not become one of them. Hale hesitated, the weight of the moment heavy in his chest. But at last he granted his comrade the mercy he had asked for. With a single shot, Sanchez was spared the fate of transformation. Rage steadied Hale's hand. He turned his weapon on the facility itself, bringing fire and ruin down upon it. Virgin Center fell in flames, and with it, what remained of Silberman's hope. Hale walked away carrying only the vial, and the memory of the two men who had stood with him and paid the price. By November 1951, the Chimera had pressed her assault into the outer territories of the United States. Cities braced for sieges, supply lines fractured, and the whispers of collapse echoed through every command post. It was in this tense atmosphere that Nathan Hale was dispatched on yet another high-risk assignment. On November 16th, Hale joined Captain Anton Nash, a brilliant but cautious SRPA scientist, on a mission to recover technology from a downed Chimera shuttle near Bergeaud. The wreckage lay half buried in the frozen earth, a jagged wound in landscape, still steaming with alien fire. For SRPA, the price was too valuable to ignore. A chance to unlock the Chimera's secrets, or at least slow their advance. Hale's squad fought its way through hostile patrols, Chimera determined to reclaim what was theirs. Inside the shattered shuttle, amid the stink of scorched metal and ichor, they located what they had come for, the Chimera database. A strange architecture, pulsing with encrypted knowledge. But victory came at a price. As the team pulled back under heavy fire, Captain Nash was struck down, the mission's architect bleeding out on the cold ground. Hale carried the database to safety, but Nash's body was left behind in the ruins. For the SRPA, the mission was a success. The database was theirs. For Hale, it was another reminder that every victory in this war was paid for in blood. Only days after Bergeaud, on November 19, 1951, Hale broke faith with the SRPA protocols. With the Chimera pressing deeper into the American heartland, he convinced VTOL pilot Harley Parvis to take him on an unsanctioned detour back to South Dakota, back to the Farley Ranch, where he had once known a family. The flight was tense and silent, and Hale's gut told him what he already feared. When he reached the homestead, the truth lay waiting. The Farleys were gone, slaughtered in the Chimera's advance. Only Susan, his foster sister, had escaped. A note left behind in her familiar hand told him she had fled to one of the protection camps, clinging to survival in a world unraveling. Amid the ashes of his own childhood home, Hale stumbled across two survivors, Mark and Tina, a pair of teenage siblings who had endured weeks alone, armed and wary but unbroken. They reminded Hale of himself, of what it meant to be orphaned by the cruelty of fate. He gathered them up and led them to the VTOL, protecting them through the wasteland until they could be delivered to safety. Reluctantly, he sent them to the protection camp, though his instincts told him such places are only temporary sanctuaries at best. When Hale returned, there was no hiding what he had done. Major Richard Blake reprimanded him sharply, threatening him with a court-martial for disobeying orders, jeopardizing military resources, and squandering valuable equipment and fuel. Yet Blake, perhaps recognizing both Hale's humanity and his worth to the war effort, tempered the punishment. Instead of a tribunal, Hale was docked for the lost VTOL and its fuel, a slap on the wrist for what might otherwise have ended his career. In the weeks that followed, Hale was thrust into another high-stakes mission, Operation Iron Fist. The Chimera had stockpiled nuclear fuel rods near Hot Springs, South Dakota. And if humanity was to survive, those rods had to be seized before they could weaponize it. It was a joint strike, the hardened veterans of the 5th Ranger Battalion, fighting alongside the augmented might of the Sentinels. Among the team assigned to Hale was Dr. Linda Brary, a scientist tasked with securing the fuel rods once they were captured. Fate twisted the knife cruelly. Brary was the fiancée of Captain Anton Nash, the very SRPA scientist Hale had watched die at Bear Boot only weeks before. She carried herself with a quiet resilience, her grief locked behind professional resolve, but Hale could feel the weight between them. The operation itself was brutal. The Chimera defended their cache with waves of hybrids and stalkers. The air thick with plasma fire and smoke. Hale and his squad pushed relentlessly forward, their sentinel reflexes and strength carving a path where ordinary men would have faltered. Through shattered defenses and alien fortifications, they fought until the last nuclear fuel rods were secured. Operation Iron Fist ended in victory. The cargo delivered it to human hands. Yet for Hale, the triumph was hollow. Each success seemed only to remind him of the losses that trailed in his wake. Nash among them, fighting beside Barry, was a reminder that behind every fallen soldier, there were lives and loves left in ruin. But December 1951, the war had grown more complicated than soldiers in Chimera. Whispers of betrayal reached the highest levels of command. Henry Walker, former Secretary of War, had allegedly turned traitor. Chief of Staff William Dentweiler ordered Hale and Major Blake to investigate, and if the rumors proved true, to silence Walker permanently. The trail led first to the ruins of Chicago, not swallowed by Chimeran occupation. Hale deployed with a squad of sentinels under Captain Bo Richards, braving the frozen, half-collapsed city streets. In the shadows of crumbling skyscrapers, they confronted members of the Freedom First, the resistance movement rumored to be sheltering Walker. But the truth cut short their mission. Walker had never arrived. The search pressed on, this time west to Custer, Montana, where Freedom First operated a recruitment center. Disguised and infiltrating, Hale expected danger. But what he found was far more personal. Susan Farley, his foster sister. Alive but changed. She had joined Freedom First, drawn to the ideals of independence and resistance against both Chimera and government control. Recognition passed between them, shattering his cover. Armed guards took Hale into custody, interrogating him as a potential spy. But once he revealed his true mission and identity, the situation shifted. Susan intervened, and Hale was released. The reunion was bitter. Hale urged her to leave with him to find safety, but Susan refused. She spoke with conviction about her choice, about fighting for a cause she believed in, even if it meant standing apart from him. To Hale, who had spent his life defined by loss and duty, her words were both painful and final. When he left Custer, he carried with him not his sister's rescue, but the knowledge that she had chosen a different war. On December 15, 1951, Hale's duties shifted from battlefield to politics. He was assigned to the security detail of President Noah Grace, who had embarked on a so-called victory tour through Denver. A gesture meant to project strength and unity at a time when the war's outcome was anything but certain. Hale, ever vigilant, kept his eyes on the edge of the crowd, the rooftops, the hidden lines of sight. That vigilance saved Grace's life. From across the street, Hale caught the glint of a rifle scope in the window of a hotel. Without hesitation, he acted, cutting off the sniper's line of fire and forcing a rapid takedown. The assassin was subdued before the shock could land, but when the identity of the attacker was revealed, Hale's world stopped cold. It was Susan. Dragged in chains to the detention facility, she faced a life sentence for attempted assassination of the president. Hale visited her there, desperate to understand. Through the bars, the siblings clashed, not in violence, but in words. Hale begged for leniency, trying to intercede on her behalf, but Susan refused, her voice sharp with anger. To her, Noah Grace was a corrupt figurehead, a man unworthy of protection. She condemned Hale for saving him, accusing her foster brother of being blind to the rot within the government he served. Shortly after, Hale was pulled back into the SRPA business. News had broken from an unexpected source. Harley Burrell, an escaped prisoner, revealed that Henry Walker, the man Hale had been ordered to hunt, was alive, but in Chimera hands. He was being held in the Convergence Center near Madison, Wisconsin. Once again, duty pulled Hale away, carrying him deeper into the war, even as the last of his family slipped beyond his reach. The march into Madison, Wisconsin, was one of Hale's most dangerous undertakings yet. Intelligence pointed to a Chimera conversion center, and within its walls, the man Hale had been chasing for months, Henry Walker. Hale led a full strike team into the city, accompanied by Harley Burrell, the escaped prisoner who had revealed Walker's location, and the chief of staff, William Dentweiler, whose presence hinted at the mission's political gravity. The strike force fought their way inside, tearing through hybrid patrols and liberation chambers until they reached the cells. Human prisoners were freed in waves, their faces hollow by suffering, but lit with sudden hope. Along the chaos, Burrell confided to Hale that the truth Walker had carried, that President Noah Grace was not preparing for victory, but for betrayal. Grace's secret plan, Project Omega, was a negotiation with the Chimera, trading the survival of the United States for the destruction of the rest of the world. Walker, branded a traitor by Grace's regime, had sought only to expose the plot. He carried a tape recorder that contained proof, meant to be delivered to Freedom First. The revelation shattered the operation's purpose. Hale acted without hesitation. He ordered Detweiler detained on the spot, stripping him of authority, and commanded his men to prioritize the evacuation of the Madison survivors. Then he turned back to the fight, leading a charge against a flood of Chimeran reinforcements. The battle reached its peak when a Goliath thundered into the field, its massive bulk looming over the ruins. Hale directed the strike force with ruthless precision, finally bringing the beast down in a storm of fire. But victory was bitter. When the smoke cleared, Walker was already dead, claimed by the war he had tried to stop. In his place, Hale found only the tape recorder, still clutched tight. When he pressed play, the voice of Henry Walker filled the silence, detailing the truth of Grace's betrayal and the nightmare design of Project Omega. What Hale heard in that moment would change not only the war, but his place in it. On December 24th, 1951, the war reached its darkest hour. Nathan Hale traveled to Sheridan, Wyoming, where President Noah Grace had arranged a clandestine meeting with the Chimera's most dangerous prisoner, Daedalus. To the world, Sheridan was just another fortified stronghold. In truth, it was the site of Grace's ultimate gamble. When Hale arrived, Major Blake informed him of his new assignment, head of security for the entire negotiation. It was a role that gave him both authority and proximity. Both also placed him at the center of a conspiracy he could no longer ignore. Inside the secure chamber, Hale watched as Grace delivered his proposal to Daedalus. The president's words confirmed everything Walker had died to prove. Project Omega was real. Grace intended to bargain the survival of the United States by sacrificing the rest of the world to a Chimera. It was treason dressed in statesmanship. Hale did not hesitate. In one swift motion, he drew his sidearm and fired. Grace collapsed instantly, a bullet through the head. His betrayal silenced before it could become history. But the act carried consequences Hale could not control. With Grace dead, Daedalus seized his chance. He broke free of his restraints, his voice carrying both fury and triumph, retreating to a waiting Chimera battleship. He gave a single order. Sheridan was to be destroyed. Within moments, the city was engulfed in fire, as the battleship's weapons reduced it to ruins. Daedalus vanished into the skies, carrying his vengeance and power with him. In the aftermath, SRPA quietly buried the truth. Grace's assassination was erased from record, his death rewritten, and Project Omega sealed away as though it never existed. Nathan Hale was never held accountable. On January 5th, 1952, Nathan Hale's service was finally recognized with a promotion to first lieutenant. No longer an outlier or experiment, he now fought at the head of Echo Team, a unit forged from Sentinels who carried the same affection he bore. Among them were veterans like Benjamin Warner and Aaron Hawthorne, as well as another survivor of Project Abraham, Joseph Campelli, a man whose path would one day intertwine faithfully with Hale's own. Their commander, Lieutenant Hank Levet, was as much a mentor as he was a leader, steadying the team through fire and loss. That spring, Hale proved his worth beyond question. On April 11th, he led an operation into Wisconsin that ended with the rescue of 18 stranded civilians. The mission earned him the Silver Star, though Hale himself spoke little of medals. His satisfaction only came from the lives he spared among the ruins. November 8th, they spearheaded Operation Kodiak, infiltrating a Chimera factory where enemy fighter craft were being manufactured. Hale turned the tide by overlighting an auxiliary reactor outside the facility. He triggered a chain reaction to destroy the plant from within, flushing out its command units and leaving the skies momentarily free. 3 days later, Operation Frozen Fortress carried Echo into another crucible, with Hale once again at the forefront of his planning and execution. Each mission honed his instincts further, his men coming to trust not only his strength, but his clarity under fire. On December 21st, Echo launched an assault against the Stalker production facility in Rylith, North Carolina. The battle was brutal, the defenses relentless. In the chaos, Lieutenant Leviat was killed, struck down before Hale's eyes. In that moment, command of Echo Team passed to Hale himself. It was a burden he accepted without hesitation, though it weighed heavily upon him. By 1953, however, the greater threat came not from Chimera outside, but from within. Hale's own body was changing. His cellular receptors, once restrained by the inhibitor serum, had begun to resist the treatment. The virus inside him was pushing back, growing stronger, and the risk of his conversion loomed closer with every passing day. Even as he led Echo to victory after victory, the shadow of what he might become hung over them all. On May 15, 1953, the war for America's survival reached its breaking point. Chimeran fleet descended in full force, launching a massive invasion across the nation's coastlines. Cities burned from Atlantic to Pacific, and San Francisco became one of the first to fall under the siege. At SRPA Station 3, Hale stood with Echo Team as the base trembled under the attack. He had just endured another surgery, one more desperate attempt to slow the infection that threatened to consume him. But there was no time for recovery. As Furious poured into the facility through the moon pool, Hale sealed the breach, buying precious time for evacuation. At the heart of the chaos, he ensured Dr. Mikolov escaped, along with the invaluable stock of inhibitor serums. Before the retreat was complete, Hale fought and killed a towering kraken, a massive body thrashing through the waves before sinking below the bay. From there, Hale would regroup with Echo and a detachment of Black Ops pursuing a damaged Chimera battleship limping north from the fight. Their convoy followed his trail into Orwick until a disaster struck. A Chimera ambushed the column, slaughtering every soldier under Hale's immediate command. Bloodied and alone, Hale staggered into town, where he finally reunited with the surviving sentinels of Echo Team. Together they improvised a desperate plan, hijacking a Chimera shuttle. Once aboard, Echo split up, planting explosives throughout the vessel's systems, while Hale pushed forward alone to the bridge. There, amid the humming alien machinery, he uncovered Chimera's next move, a fleet-wide strike aimed at Twin Falls, Idaho. It was to be the breach point of the Liberty Defense Perimeter, the last major barrier holding back the Chimera from the American heartland. The mission turned to chaos as the ship detonated prematurely, tearing itself apart around them. Hale barely escaped with his life, the explosions painting the sky in the burning debris. With the intel secured, Echo sent word to Major Blake. The Liberty Perimeter would be tested at Twin Falls. As Echo's stolen shuttle approached the town, stalkers locked on and shredded the craft from the sky. Hale and his men crash-landed hard, scattering across the outskirts. Alone in the darkened streets, Hale quickly saw what had become of the town. Spinners had swept through the night, leaving behind entire communities twisted and infected. Hale's path led him to Benjamin Warner, cornered by a pack of ravenous Grims. Hale cut them down and pulled Warner to safety, only to hear the man's worst fear. His family had lived here. Warner's voice crackled with grief, but Hale, ever the steady hand, offered what comfort he could, that perhaps they escaped before the attack, making it to the protection camp in Baton Rouge. It was a fragile hope, but it gave Warner something to hold on to in the ashes. Soon after, Hale and Warner reunited with Aaron Hawthorne and Joseph Campelli, reforming Echo in the heart of the ruined town. But the Chimera were not done. Enemy airships closed in, threatening to smash the Liberty Defense Perimeter wide open. Command's orders were clear. The defense towers had to be reactivated. Echo split into pairs to cover the different sites. Hale Capelli took the North Tower, pushing through waves of hybrids until they reached the summit. There, Capelli was ambushed and dragged into the shadows by a monstrous Mother Spinner. Hale fought through the creature's thrashing limbs, slaying it in a brutal clash and pulling Capelli free. Miraculously, the younger Sentinel survived, shaken but alive. Together, they reactivated the tower, bringing the defenses back online. Across Twin Falls, the other towers rolled to life. The combined firepower cut through the skies, halting the Chimera fleet before it could reach the perimeter. Against all odds, Echo Team had saved the line. As dust settled, orders came down. Echo was overdue for inhibitor treatment and was to proceed immediately to the nearest station. For Hale, however, the command fell on deaf ears. The infection inside him had long outpaced the serum's grasp. What mattered now was not treatment, but purpose. Reports came in of Station Genesis in Bryce Canyon, under direct assault from the Chimeran flagship. It was more than a strategic target. Dr. Mikulov was there. For Hale, the decision was simple. He rallied a squad of Black Ops soldiers and set his course for Bryce Canyon, disobeying orders once again. The fate of the war, and of himself, was pulling him towards its end. When Hale led his squad into Bryce Canyon, he knew it was a march into the teeth of the enemy. The Chimeran flagship loomed overhead, and the valley below crawled with the concentration of forces unlike anything he had seen before. His Black Ops soldiers fought bravely, but the Chimera unleashed their most nightmarish weapon, the Swarm. In a maelstrom of claws and fire, Hale's men would cut down one by one until only he remained, forcing his way forward alone. Deep within Station Genesis, Hale had found what he had come for. Dr. Mikulov, alive but with him, deathless. The radiating figure radiated both menace and certainty as he activated the massive tower that had dominated the canyon. Before vanishing into the skies once more, Deathless turned to Hale with words that echoed like a death sentence. Earth belongs to the Chimera. When the echoes faded, Mikulov told Hale the truth. Deathless was no alien god, but a man, Jordan's shepherd, a fellow subject of Project Abraham. He had received the same injection of pure Chimeran DNA that now coursed through Hale's veins. But where Hale had held on to fragments of humanity, Shepard had been utterly transformed. His plan was apocalyptic in scale, to activate the entire Chimera network and remake Earth itself. Hale and Mikulov fought through the swarm, clawing their ways out of Genesis until Echo Team arrived for extractions. Relief, however, was short-lived. On the flight out, Hale was confronted by Joseph Capelli, his fellow Sentinel comrade. Capelli's patience had broken. Hale had skipped his inhibitor treatments too long, his golden eyes and cold demeanor betraying how far the infection had progressed. Capelli pressed his rifle close, vowing that when Hale finally succumbed, he would be the one to put him down. Hale's response was calm, almost chilling. In one swift motion, he seized Capelli by the throat, holding him fast with an iron grip. His voice was quiet, unshaken, as he met the younger man's glare, cold acceptance of the promise, as if daring Capelli to follow through when the time came. The final march of Echo began in Chicago, where the city's towering hub stood as one of Daedalus's anchors to the Chimera network. Head led the charge through the shattered metropolis, cutting a path through wave after wave of hybrids, stalkers, and howlers. When the colossal Leviathan tore its way through the ruins, Hale rallied his men, driving it down with fire until the path was clear. At last they opened the corridor to the tower itself. Inside, Dr. Mikulov worked feverishly, and for a brief moment, it seemed as victory was at hand. The Chicago tower went dark, its pulse silenced by human hands. Across the ocean, Daedalus reached through the network from Iceland, reactivating the tower as if Hale's battle had been nothing more than a delay. The SRPA, Echo, and their dwindling allies launched a desperate assault on the Howler Tower in Iceland, command nexus Daedalus himself controlled. Daedalus had anticipated them, luring the humans into a trap. Echo's forces were torn apart in ambush, the battlefield littered with the dead. Blake ordered a retreat, but Hale refused. With Echo's survivors at his side, he pushed forward into the storm, determined to end Daedalus before the towers could be fully reawakened. They found him amid the alien machinery, glowing with power, his voice echoing through the chamber like a prophet. The cost was immediate. Benjamin Warner and Aaron Hawthorne fell, struck down by Daedalus's wrath. Hale himself was hurled aside, a near-fatal wound tearing into his chest. As the world dimmed around him, but Daedalus did not finish him. Perhaps it was arrogance, or perhaps some twisted recognition of the kinship they had shared as only true sons of Project Abraham. Before the killing blow could land, Joseph Capelli pulled Hale from the jaws of death. Together they staggered from the Holler Tower, escaping the ice and fire of Iceland as the dream of victory slipped away. Hale lived, but the wound went deeper than flesh. Echo was broken. Daedalus was ascendant, and the Chimeran towers loomed over Earth. The war was not ending. It was only tightening its grip. For 6 long weeks after Iceland, Hale drifted between life and death. His body, broken by Daedalus's strike, lay in a coma under constant supervision of Dr. Mikolov. Machines hummed around him. Monitors tracked every faltering heartbeat, and valves and inhibitors were pumped into his veins in desperate attempts to stall the inevitable. But the virus inside him was no longer yielding. The treatments were overdue, their effect diminishing with each day, and Hale's cells slowly bent further towards a Chimeran will. Mikolov tried everything his science could offer, but all he could do was watch as the man he had once saved slipped further away. While Hale lingered in stasis, the war outside turned catastrophic. The Chimeran fleet breached the Liberty defense perimeter, the last great wall meant to hold them back. What followed was annihilation. Cities burned, defenses crumbled, and in a span of days, over 80 million lives were lost. The survivors who remained had no choice but to retreat south, streaming towards the only bastion still standing, Baton Rouge. Hale was quietly moved into exodus, his comatose body transported under heavy guard to a hidden SRP facility, Louisiana. There, surrounded by swamps and secrecy, he lay as both hope and threat, humanity's greatest weapon and perhaps his most dangerous liability. The world around him was collapsing, and still Nathan Hale dreamed in silence. His mind caught between the remnants of his humanity and the alien call that grew louder with each passing day. By June 1953, Dr. Mikolov believed he was close to a breakthrough. Once the sleepless nights had led him to the Zeta series inhibitors, a stronger treatment that might finally tame the virus raging inside Nathan Hale. He estimated 2 more weeks would be enough to complete the formula and safely inoculate his patient. 2 weeks to save Hale's life. But time was a luxury humanity no longer possessed. Over the Chicxulub crater in Mexico, Chimeran fleet had gathered, hovering in terrible formation. Great arcs of energy laced down from the tower network, striking the crater with blinding force. It was not a simple occupation, it was preparation. Something vast and apocalyptic. Command's answer was desperate and direct. Operation Black Eden. A plan to implant and detonate a nuclear fission bomb inside the heart of the Chimeran flagship. For that mission, they needed Nathan Hale. Mikolov protested, pointing out the cost. Without the Zeta inhibitors, Hale could survive at most 3 hours after waking before the virus consumed him completely. But Major Blake dismissed the warning. Orders were clear. Hale would fight, inhibitors or not. His body, his humanity, his very soul, they were expendable, so long as the mission succeeded. Thus Nathan Hale, half human, half chimera, and already teetering on the edge of transformation, was roused once more, not as a soldier with a future, but as a weapon with a ticking clock. On June 26, 1953, the day of Operation Black Eden, Nathan Hale awoke from his long coma. The world he opened his eyes to was almost unrecognizable. The Chimera had shattered the Liberty defense perimeter, slaughtered tens of millions, and now gathered above the Chicxulub crater, channeling energies from the tower network into something Mikolov could only describe as catastrophic. Hale learned the truth of his condition at last. Without the unfinished Zeta inhibitors, the virus inside him would soon overwhelm what remained of his humanity. Mikolov's estimate was merciless. 3 hours, no more, before Nathan Hale was completely gone. For a moment, silence hung heavy. But when Joseph Capelli spoke, it was not as a subordinate, but as a man who understood the gravity of choice. He told his commanding officers to use whatever time Hale had left, whether measured in hours or minutes. Hale accepted without hesitation. He would not waste the little humanity he had left hiding in a bed. If his life could be a weapon, then he would wield it. Just as the operation began, the convoy transporting the nuclear fission bomb was ambushed. Chimera tore them apart before it could reach its staging point. Major Blake was cut off from his charge. The weapons separated in confusion. Hale Compelli plunged into the fray, carving through enemy ranks until they recovered the bomb and pulled Blake back to safety. With no time to spare, the plan took its most daring turn. Alongside X-Ray Squad, Hale and Capelli seized control of the Chimeran shuttle, fighting their way aboard and wrenching its controls into human hands. With the bomb secured in its hold, the team launched into the skies, bound for the Chimeran flagship. It was a mission for which none expected to return, but it was the only chance Earth had left. Hale and Joseph Capelli pushed into the flagship's elaborate corridors, the nuclear payload heavy on their mission and their minds. Their objective was simple in theory: reach the control room, shut down the reactor's cooling shields, and give Major Blake's team the window to arm the bomb. Their rifles spitting fire in the dim, alien glow of the ship's interior. As the shields fell, Blake and X-Ray Squad were ambushed. Plasma fire tore them apart before they could plant the weapon. Worse, the Chimera seized the bomb itself, carrying it deep into the vessel, delivering it straight into the hands of Daedalus. Hale did not hesitate, but Compelli covering his flank, he plunged forward, alone at times, carving his own path through the flagship. At last he confronted Daedalus in the heart of the ship. The being that had once been Jordan Shepard stood resplendent in alien power, his voice echoing with the conviction of one who believed himself the future of Earth. Their battle was savage. Daedalus hurled psychic force like thunder, ripping bulkheads apart with the flick of his will. Hale answered with gunfire, his humanity burning at its brightest, even as the virus inside clawed closer to dominance. Blow by blow, wound by wound, Hale fought until at last he struck the killing blow. Daedalus collapsed in a storm of alien light. But his death was not the end. As Daedalus' body convulsed, a surge of pure energy erupted from him, lashing onto Hale. In an instant, that power, psychokinetic, devastating, otherworldly, poured into him. His veins burned like molten iron, his mind alight with whispers that were not his own. In that moment, Hale was no longer just a man. He had inherited everything Daedalus was. Time was running out. The bomb's activation timer ticked down, 4 minutes to detonation. With his new powers crackling in his hands, Hale carved through the Chimera that flooded the corridors, bending their weapons back upon them, hurling their bodies aside with force unseen by human eyes. He fought his way to Capelli, and together they seized the Chimera's shuttle, tearing free of the flagship as the bomb's countdown reached its end. The detonation lit the sky like the birth of a second sun. The flagship and the fleet surrounding it were obliterated, torn apart in nuclear fire. Yet the blast did not spare Hale Compelli. The electromagnetic pulse ripped through their shuttle, frying its systems and sending careening from the heavens. The vessel screamed as it plummeted towards Earth, two survivors caught between triumph and the unknown.
Just once. I wish you'd try landing one of these things. Hale? What happened? What the hell is that?
Can you hear them? They are calling to us. It's beautiful.
Stay back.
This is just the beginning.
Forgive me, sir. It was an honor.
Nathan Hale, soldier, sentinel, legend, fell. His war finally over. In that moment, the world lost its greatest protector and inherited the shadow of what was to come.
I killed Nathan Hale. I had no choice. He was becoming one of them. He could have stopped me, but I think he wanted to die. At least that's what I keep telling myself. Even in death, Hale continued to fight. Dr. Malikov found a unique protein in Hale's blood. He isolated it, created a vaccine. Finally, a cure for the Chimera virus. We were all inoculated, saved again by Hale one last time. Hale was the hero, and I was the villain.
In the years that followed, humanity fought its way from the brink. The Chimera, once poised to erase mankind from the Earth, were finally driven to extinction after the destruction of the New York Tower and the closing of the wormhole that had threatened to deliver reinforcements from their homeworld. For the first time in decades, the sky was clear of their shadow. A victory had come at a cost few could ever measure. The war's end was written in blood of countless soldiers and civilians, but none more than Nathan Hale. His sacrifice, his life, his body, and even his humanity, it paved the way for survival. Through the Hale vaccine, his blood saved what remained of mankind. Through his final stand, his legend became immortal. In recognition, the natural cemetery was consecrated in his name. Beneath rows of white markers, the fallen were laid to rest. Men, women, and sentinel alike, gathered under the banner of a man who carried humanity's hope on his shoulders. And visitors came not only to honor Hale, but to remember the cost of survival. His name, etched in stone, stood as both a warning and a promise that even in the darkest hour, one man's defiance could change the fate of the world. Nathan Hale was gone, but the nation he had saved would never forget him.